Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today I'm coming to you from a little known geologic wonderland, a place called Red Canyon. And this is part of the National Forest Service, and it sits just outside of Bryce. And so a lot of people drive past this and don't realize this is here, but basically it's a mini Bryce Canyon. Today I'm going to take you to look at Red Canyon, talk a little bit about the geology here, and take a look at this visitor center that I've never been to before. So it's probably been over 20 years since I've been in this part of Utah. So with that being said, let's get to it. Right away, one of the really cool things you can see are what are known as hoodoos. And these are what Bryce Canyon's famous for, but it's the same formation here as Bryce Canyon. It's a formation known as the Claron Formation, which is a bunch of ancient lake deposits across this part of southern Utah. So let's go into the visitor center. Let's learn a little bit more about Red Canyon. So here's a map of Utah, and I can show you where we're at here in Red Canyon. So if I pan down, we're in the southern portion of Utah. So Red Canyon sits right here. And again, it's not a state park, it's not a national park, it's part of the National Forest Service, but it has some spectacular scenery that I think people often miss. Now, if I pan down a little bit, we'll see St. George, Utah. And if I keep going, Las Vegas is another about an hour and a half that direction. And going up, we can see where Salt Lake City is there. And this gives you an idea where we're at. And Bryce Canyon National Park sits right here. So you often drive past here, but people don't visit as often. So I want to make sure I shared this with you all. And they have a nice exhibit of people coming through this area and how people visited this area through time, including some of the early settlers living out here. And I believe they also have stuff dedicated to movie making here, and I'm hoping we'll get a chance to go through this Red Canyon tunnel where they carved this cave or the tunnel through the Claron Formation here. And they have a bit about the early people that lived here. It says they have evidence of people here from 10,000 years ago. Wow, 8,000 BC to 500 AD. They had hunters and gatherers, and then they had the Fremont culture here from 500 to 1100 AD. And then going forward, there were the Paiute, I believe, that lived in this area. And they have little faux hoodoos in here. Those are pretty cool. And hoodoos form the process of weathering, and really it's a combination of mechanical and chemical weathering that create these. And I don't think they have a display on it, but we'll see if we can talk a little bit more about that as we walk around. Here we go, water at work. A single force responsible for the remarkable scenery of Red Canyon, and that's water. The limestone and siltstones, which are what make up these hoodoos, the limestones being more resistive, and the sandstones and siltstones and mudstones being less resistive, can weather easier. But those are what make up these hoodoos, and water from rain gets between the cracks of the rock, and through freeze-thaw action, it'll actually slowly start cracking the rock and pieces start tumbling down. So really it's a story of water and gravity that create these hoodoos. And so you can imagine this would have been one single rock face, and as they got little cracks in it, water would come in and freeze and thaw and freeze and thaw. And so every time water freezes, it expands. So it slowly chips away and cracks these rocks over a long period of time, and eventually you're left with hoodoos. And they have a thing here on dinosaurs. Now, dinosaurs were extinct by the time the lakes that were depositing the limestones and siltstones and mudstones and sandstones here for the Claron Formation. However, it sounds like in this area they have some Cretaceous rocks, and they did find a part of a hadrosaur by Escalante, which is about, I believe, 20 or 30 miles from here. And here's a piece of that hadrosaur. So that's an actual dinosaur bone in there they found not too far from here in some Cretaceous rocks. That's pretty cool. So here's a nice description about the Claron Formation. So this was an ancient lake at one time, and because of that, ancient lakes can get limestone, just like you think about in the ocean. And they said about 60 million years ago this lake was emplaced here across much of southern Utah. So you can think of like a great lake that would have been here, like we think of Lake Superior or something like that, would have covered a lot of central Utah. Eventually, this whole area pops up due to the laramide orogeny, and of course we are on top of what's known as the Colorado Plateau, and because of that there's a bunch of erosion that started to take place, and that's what's actually left us with the beautiful scenery that we see in the background here. So they have an interpretive trail called Interpretive Guide to the Pink Ledges. So we're going to go do that walk. It's about half a mile. They said it takes about 45 minutes. I'll show you some of that so you can get an idea about what Red Canyon looks like, and we can talk a little bit about the geology, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the other trails. All right, so here's the start of the interpretive trail, and you can see right away we're going to start seeing some amazing hoodoos up there. And hoodoos are those features that are created by the freeze-thaw action of water, and then gravity starts taking the rocks and tumbling them down. So for those who don't have time to actually hike down into Bryce Canyon, this is a great stop where you can actually get below the hoodoos and actually look up and get a different vantage point than what you see in Bryce, which really requires hiking down into the canyon. And this is a pretty easy walk where we can actually see very similar things you'd see there at Bryce Canyon. Not quite as impressive as there, but still really cool. Here's a little bit more about hoodoos, and it says, what's in a name? So you are surrounded by water and ice sculpted rock formations known as hoodoos. Hoodoos, tall, knobby, and eerie shapes, have earned them many nicknames. The Paiute Indians, the local indigenous people, called them legend people. When early Anglo settlers came in here, they reminded them of their own culture's legends and myths, and they called them fairy chimneys. And some places they call this Utah's fairyland. And I could see that as I look around. So as a geologist, one of the things we do is we'll come down and we'll look at what's come down or what's been eroded, and we can take a closer look at what is making up the hoodoos and the rocks above us, because it's all come down due to gravity and weathering. And so we can take a look at some of these limestones. So this would be like a freshwater limestone, so a limestone deposit in a large lake. We can also see there are cobbles and gravels, suggesting that there's probably some rivers or streams associated with the lakes as well. And as we get a little closer underneath the rocks here, you can really get an idea about the size of some of these hoodoos and these columns that are developing. Here's some of the big boulders that have tumbled down, and you'll check out the colors that are inside of them. So this is a combination of iron staining that's occurred within the Clarion Formation. And you'll see it creates these pinks and oranges and makes such beautiful scenery. So we're at stop number 1 of the interpretive trail, and from this spot you can actually see some different geology. First of all, we're still in the Clarion Formation down here, the 60 million year old ancient lake system. But on top of the ridge, there's a bunch of black rocks up there, and those are a bunch of igneous rocks or volcanic flows, specifically basalt flows, from some much younger volcanoes in this area. And younger being volcanoes that erupted in this area as late as 10,000 years ago, so towards the end of the last ice age or ice advances. Pretty interesting, but you can see those black rocks capping the Clarion Formation in this area, creating yet another drastic or dramatic color change across this area. And I think I found Chip and Dale over here. There's some little ground chipmunks you'll see running around, and they're really cute, and they're all over this area. If you ever come here and visit, take some time and watch some of the wildlife. They're a lot of fun to watch. There's two just hanging out playing together. Worked our ways up a little farther along the trail, and you can see these stunning views. And what you can really see that's nice is one of these nice thick limestone beds up there that are part of the Clarion Formation. Pretty cool. So I'm up at stop number 2 now. I'm just going to give a nice panoramic view. Looking out towards the west, you can see some hoodoos, and you can actually see a volcano way out there that's on top of the Markagunt Plateau. There's a little mound out there, and that's one of these younger volcanoes in the area. But what I want to just show is how, as we work our way up, we can see some of these hoodoos from different vantage points. And you can see how it's weathering different ways. In fact, right in here is a great area to start seeing how that freeze-thaw action may happen, where you develop these cracks, and over winter water gets in there, it freezes, it expands, it cracks, and it starts shedding all of this material down. And eventually what happens is the more resistive units, like what we see up there, which are the limestones, are sitting on top of less resistive units, and they create these spires through time. It's a nice view. In fact, here's one where you can really see that little arch in there, where you can see one of these hoodoos being developed today through that freeze-thaw action and weathering. It really feels like I'm walking on another planet when I walk through this section. And it's one of the things I love about geology, is the amazing landscapes that can be developed depending on the different types of rocks. As I come over here, we get yet another view. We're slowly working our way around those spectacular hoodoos there. But what we can also see are these layers coming through. So each of these are layers that were deposited by the lake that was here, Lake Claron, or I believe they actually call it Lake Flagstaff. We can also see these more gray features on top. There's some gravels up there and some limestones that are more resistive. Pretty cool to see that. I turn around the other direction. What's fascinating to me is how much more iron rich in some of the bright colors that we see in one direction versus another. Here, depending on kind of the weathering, what kind of fluids have worked their way through these rocks over the millions of years that they've been here getting deposited. So we've worked up a couple more little switchbacks. It's not a ton of elevation change, but there is some here. But we get a spectacular view off in the distance. Now, one of the things we can see from here, which is pretty unique, is there's actually a fault zone running right through there, and this is known as a severe fault. And this is a major fault in this area, and it's basically the sister fault to what's known as the Hurricane Fault towards St. George area, and one that's actually had earthquakes on it in the not too distant past. And the severe fault over here drops those volcanics we saw before down towards the valley and keeps these raised up here. So this would be a normal fault dropping down towards the west. And this is kind of some of the last extension of the Basin Range into this area. So some of the Basin Range faults actually do affect, and some of the Basin Range extension does affect parts of the Colorado Plateau, specifically the western part here. And it's pretty neat to be able to see that and tie all that story together. And I just turned around and looked up, and look at that amazing hoodoo right above me. So one of the favorite things for people to do when they come to Bryce Canyon or somewhere here like Red Canyon is look at the shapes that are created. Like that looks like a little person hanging out or smiling. And they give names to a bunch of these different hoodoos that look like different things. Like there's one in Bryce called Thor's Hammer. They have the Queen. The Queen's Garden's a hiking do in Bryce. And I don't know what the names are the ones from here, but you can see where individuals would see these and come up with some fun names and what they represent. Maybe that one looks like the alien. Although this is a pretty short hike, about half a mile, I believe, you see some stunning scenery. Like, look at this. It's pretty impressive. And I think we can actually see some of the basalt flows peeking out behind the Claron Formation here. Worked my way up a little farther, and here's another little alcove here. And you can look at this. We can get up close and personal to a hoodoo. So here I am for scale against this hoodoo. I said looked like a little alien from the other side, but you get an idea about the size of one of these. And this is a pretty small one, but it is neat that we can get this close to it. Okay, let's continue down the trail. We're about halfway. We're at stop number 5, which if I open up my trusty map, stop number 5 says geologists use the term hoodoo to describe the mystical and magical appearance of the rocks that make Red Canyon famous. So this is the hoodoo stop on the interpretive trail. Here's a nice view of a little gully that's been created by more recent erosion. You can see how it's worked down the side of the formation here and created this nice little gully. And as I'm walking around, check out this ancient, basically stream deposits that would have cut through part of the Claron formation here. And we can see where they've been left behind. And you can look at all these pebbles. So that's what we call a conglomerate that you can view along this hike. And actually what you can see also, see how there's fractures? So you can get an idea about the fractures even for this material coming through here is slowly being eroded, probably by freeze thaw as well. So as I'm walking, I did a little bit more reading as I stopped and looked at that conglomerate that we can still see part of here, which gives us a clue about the type of environment. I mentioned we know we're in an ancient lake here, ancient Lake Claron. And I mentioned that I think they also called it Flagstaff Lake at one point. But what's most important here is that we can see that this was an old river deposit here, and we can look and find examples of lake deposit material across much of this. And they said this was deposited between 35 and 50 million years ago. So this is a really long-lived lake system here in the central part of Utah. Here's some more of those gravelly channel deposits at the bottom, and then you can see the sandstone on top. So this would have been a river that was carving through this area. So there was probably a lake, it started drying up a bit, it became a river, and then it became a lake again as there was more water introduced. And it's pretty cool to see that story here. We can see it going from a river with a lot of energy. You see all these cobbles and pebbles. You can imagine kind of rivers today along mountain sides or raised topography, and then you can see the sandstone on top, probably meaning that the amount of energy of that river slowed down, and then eventually we had a lake in place here. I'm going to go ahead and use this opportunity to go ahead and sign off while we have these really cool hoodoos that are still behind me over here. So thank you all for joining me today to check out Red Canyon, this state forest park. Really neat stop. Somewhere if you're passing through this part of Utah, even if you're on your way to Bryce, it's worth coming here and stopping and walking around because it gives you a different view of these hoodoos. You can get up and close to at least one of them here, which I thought was really cool. The geology is fascinating, learning about this ancient lake that used to be here, seeing the old river system that came through here and seeing those volcanic rocks that are much younger on top, and starting to figure out the story of what happened here millions and millions of years ago in this part of the United States. So with that being said, thank you all for joining me today to take a look at Red Canyon. I will see you all in the next episode. Thank you all and take care. I can't pass up a chance to get a picture with Smokey the Bear here right in front of the turnoff here for Red Canyon. Only you can prevent forest fires. Pretty awesome to see Smokey the Bear's dad. You haven't seen one in years.